This is going to be the first in a series. We're going to be featuring a different speaker for our webinars each month. Next month, we're going to be talking about natural fertility methods. In April, we'll be discussing breastfeeding. And then in May, we'll be talking about natural childbirth. We also might be adding a fifth webinar that you won't want to miss. And there will be more about that on our website and our Facebook page. So with all that being said, I would like to introduce myself to you. Again, my name is Laura. I have been with the Guiding Star Project in one way or another for many years now. Very dear to my heart. I was originally the executive director for a little while, and now I'm on the board of directors, and I'm currently serving as vice chair. 7 years ago, I had 4 little children at home. Me and my husband had been doing our best to raise them. They were a rambunctious bunch. And I found myself 5 months pregnant with my daughter, Claire. And when I hit 5 months, I ended up in the emergency room, an experience maybe some of you have had. And I found myself sitting on a hospital bed, waiting to hear from a doctor because I knew something was wrong. And eventually the doctor came in and he said, "I'm sorry, we couldn't find a heartbeat. Take this bucket home with you and catch whatever resembles a baby, bring it back, and we'll dispose of it." Needless to say, I didn't bring the bucket home. Claire was delivered via an induction 2 weeks later. We buried her in our church cemetery. And I didn't know it at the time, but she was to be the first of 7 children that we would say hello and goodbye to. My husband and I have experienced 7 losses, all very different, all at different ages, stages of their development. No one of my children is any less dear to me. But it wasn't these experiences that brought me to be talking to you today. It was actually when I was honored to attend the birth of a very tiny little baby named George. He was the son of one of my dearest friends, and he was born tiny, still, and sleeping. And it was in loving my friend through this experience that I can only describe a calling. I experienced a calling to become what I am today, and that is a birth and bereavement doula. I assist women and families as they experience the loss of their baby. And through my personal and professional experiences, I've come to do what I'm doing tonight, and that is to discuss with women what it means to lose a child and what it means to heal. And I always ask myself, what can I say? What do we as mothers want to hear? And I keep coming back to the fact that if you're tuning in tonight, you have most likely experienced a loss of your own, or you have loved someone else through a loss. And if that is you tonight, I want to tell you I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss. But I also think that you're here because you want to hear what I want to hear, that it's possible to heal, that we aren't alone, that we're normal. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. And so we're going to have a discussion tonight on what it means to heal, what healing looks like, what healing feels like, and what we do about that. And so before we dive into that, a couple housekeeping things. If you are tuning in on the web, you have the ability to ask questions. There is a box underneath where you view the slides. You can submit questions through there. I can view them on my own computer here because technology is wonderful. I will refresh my screen periodically and make sure you can hear me, see if you have any questions or comments. We'll hold most of the questions till the end, but if something pops up that I think needs to be addressed immediately, I will do that. So please submit your questions if you are listening online. And again, we are recording it, so if you have to step away and you don't want to miss anything, don't worry. We'll have the recording for you after. So, before we can talk about the steps that it's necessary to take in order to heal, we have to first define what it is we're talking about here. You see, this issue of loss, miscarriage, stillbirth, infant loss, it can be really hard to talk about and to have a discussion about, because sometimes the accurate medical speak doesn't feel like it matches with the experience. For example, miscarriage, technically speaking, includes a loss anywhere from 1 week to 19 weeks gestation. A stillbirth is defined as the loss of a child at 20 weeks until term. Infant loss is generally considered to mean the loss of a child during birth, shortly after birth, or within the first year of life. But those definitions sometimes don't really feel like they match with the experience that we've had. You see, a woman who miscarries a baby at 16 weeks is going to have a much different experience than a woman who miscarries at 6 weeks. And they will have a much different experience than a woman who miscarries at 19 weeks and 3 days. And so it's important for us to have language that accurately reflects both the experiences that we have and the biological reality of losing a baby. And in a lot of ways, this is why pregnancy loss, the term pregnancy loss, is used as a catch-all. Sometimes it's referred to as reproductive loss. In their issue on reproductive loss, Feminists for Life really coined that phrase. The Guiding Star Project is committed to finding and advancing language that's going to accurately and compassionately reflect both the experience and the reality of having your baby die. Whether that baby was 6 weeks, 16 weeks, 36 weeks, or 6 months. You see, reality is language is important. The only correct language, it can hurt, language can heal. It's important for us to be able to use language that's healing. And that's what we need to talk about. So in my experience, both professional and personal, I've thought a lot about healing. I've walked a lot of women through the process of healing. I've had to go through my own healing. And I've identified 5 steps that are necessary to take in order to move through, and find this thing that seems so far out of reach sometimes, this thing called healing. And so if we're going to enter into healing, and that's what we all want, we have to understand what healing is and what healing isn't. Right? Because you're not going to wake up one day and just shout from the rooftops, "I'm healed." I mean, that'd be great. But this isn't a paper cut. This isn't strep throat. Losing a child is personal. It's a matter of the heart. And hearts don't heal like that. You see, healing is ultimately not a destination so much as it is a process that you enter into and go ever deeper through. Healing, if we are to define it, we could define it as the process of integrating our experiences and our reality with hope into our everyday lives. I'm going to say that again. If we were to define healing, we would define it as the process of integrating our experiences and our reality with hope into our everyday lives. And that can be hard, but it's so necessary. And so we're forced to ask ourselves the question, how? How do I do that? And like I said, in my personal and professional experience, I've identified 5 steps. 5 steps we have to take. And the very first of those steps is that we have to grieve. But we don't just grieve as an end in itself. We grieve so that we can move into remembering. You see, grief all by itself isn't healing. Okay, grief is a step in the process of healing. And grief is messy. Okay, you've all probably heard the stages of grief, right? Denial and then anger and then panic and then guilt and then accept. It's like this little bell curve. I think there's a graphic on your screen from in the next slide, and it shows you this nice, neat bell curve of healing. Well, the actual experience of healing looks a lot like the squiggly line roller coaster mess. Healing isn't pretty. Grief is messy. Grief isn't neat and tidy. And that's okay. It's not supposed to be neat and tidy. But it's also not the final destination. You see, there's a temptation to stay stuck in our grief. And I understand it, because we feel like in the grieving, our babies are there. We're afraid that if we're not grieving, we're forgetting. And no one wants to forget their baby. Right? I remember that was my biggest fear. When Claire died, I was so afraid that she would be forgotten. So afraid that she didn't matter. And I was afraid that if I wasn't grieving, then I was forgetting her. But that's not healing. You see, because if we stay stuck in grief, we end up identifying, our identity becomes our grief. And that's not who we were made to be. So we have to move through our grief, the complicated, confusing, messy grief. And as we allow ourselves to move through it, as we allow ourselves to feel and experience all of those things along that messy bell curve, we end up coming to a place where we're able to start remembering our babies and honoring the lives of our babies without the crushing sadness, without the confusion and the complication. We move through the grief so that we can remember. And we do that in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's through integrating the lives of the babies that we have lost into our family life. And we can do that with pictures, with birthdays, mementos, keepsakes, special rituals. There are so many different ways that you can integrate the life of your baby into your family's life. And as you do that, you help yourself to heal. You help yourself to move through the grief into remembering. And you know what? That's going to be messy too. I remember I cried every night for 3 months after Claire died. And then one night, I didn't cry. And when I realized that I didn't cry, I cried. Because, oh my goodness, was I going to forget her? That's grief, and that's healing. We used to go to the cemetery every day. It was like this compulsion. I had to go to the cemetery. And then every day turned into a couple times a week. And then a couple times a week turned into a couple times a month. And then a couple times a month turned into once a month. And then it was once every other month. And now I don't keep track. We go when we want to make sure the baby's graves are clean. We go when there's a special occasion. We go when we want to ask for their prayers. That progression, that's healing. And I've realized my babies are no less loved. They are no less important to me and my family. They are no less people for me not visiting the cemetery every day. You grieve so you can remember. You move through the grief into remembering. And that is the first step. And the second step is hard because it requires us to surrender our control. You see, our culture, our society, it feeds on this lie that we're in control. There are whole industries built on this lie. Birth control, IVF, IUI, surrogacy, abortion. They are all predicated on the lie that we are in control and should be in control of our bodies. And you know what? That's tempting to believe. Right? Because if we were in control of our bodies, then we could fix what we feel is broken about them. But it's a lie. If it was true, if we were in control of our bodies, we wouldn't be having this conversation tonight. And we will never heal if we grasp at a false sense of control. But I understand the temptation. You know, after every one of my losses, all 7, I would go get my hair cut. I would go get my hair cut even if it didn't need to be cut. And I recognize now that what I was doing was I was trying to regain a sense of control over my body. Because I felt like if I could just exercise some sort of control over my body, then it would make me feel better. But it didn't. Because I still needed healing. I still missed my babies. The only difference was now I had to miss them with a bad haircut. You see, if we want to heal, then we have to be willing to grieve so we can remember, and then surrender that false sense of control. Nature is powerful. Biology is powerful. Our bodies are governed by these things we call these natural laws. They're more powerful than we are. And when we are willing to surrender, we're ready for the next step. And the next step, believe it or not, is even a little bit harder. But it's also very necessary. Because the third step is to make peace with our bodies. And you know, as women, our whole lives, we have heard, love your body, how to love your body, 5 steps to love your body, 3 exercises to make you love your body, 5 superfoods that will make you love your body, love your body, love your body, love your body. It's like there's this cult-like attitude towards women's bodies, as if being a fulfilled woman is loving your body. And you know, in the birth world, it goes a step further. Your stretch marks are your tiger stripes, your C-section scars, your battle scar. Love them, embrace them, cherish them. Ladies, I'm going to tell you something. I do not love my body. I do not love my stretch marks. The stretch marks that I have from carrying 11 children, 7 of whom didn't live. I don't love my scars from the emergency surgeries I had to have because my baby had died. I don't love the fact that I don't have a belly button. It's gone. I don't love my body. but I have made peace with my body. And what I submit to you tonight, that it is not only possible to make peace with your body, but that it is important. It is important for your healing. You see, as women, our bodies tell a story. Our bodies were designed to create and bring forth and nourish life. This is the reality of womanhood. But women like us, women who have lost a child, it often feels like our bodies have failed. Right? If your body feels like it failed you in one of these areas, it's tempting to feel like you're less of a woman. You're not. If you have lost a baby, the story your body tells is not one of failure. It is a story of strength. It is a story of survival. And it is a story of love. Ladies, we only grieve that which we love. You are no less a mother if you only loved your baby for a short time. You are no less a mother for not having had a baby to hold. Motherhood is loving and letting go. Loving and letting go. We don't get to control the amount of time that we have to love. We don't get a choice in when we let go. But that's motherhood. And if the story that your body tells is a story of loving and letting go, you can make peace with that. And so we grieve so we can remember. We surrender our control. We make peace with our bodies. And then we're ready to find our language. And we said this before, language has power. Words are powerful. They shape perceptions. They shape our culture. Words can hurt. How many of you can identify or relate to this experience? I was in the store with my 4 living children, and I had just lost my 4th child, who was born into eternity, and I was feeling really raw. I was tired. I was sore. I was sad, and I did not want to be around people. But sometimes you need to go to the grocery store, and so you go. And so there I was in the checkout line. I just wanted to buy the whatever I was buying, milk or bread or whatnot, and just get home. But there was a friendly person behind me and saw me there with my 4 living children and thought they were cute and started a conversation. Oh, your kids are so cute. Thank you. How old are they? I tell her their ages. Oh, that's great. Do you want to have any more? Ugh. And in that moment, what do you say? It was like this eternity happened in 2 seconds as I'm panicking in my head. Do I just tell her no so she leaves me alone? Do I tell her, well, we tried and that didn't work? Do I tell her, well, we actually did, but they died? I mean, what do I say? I don't want to ignore the fact that I have other children. I don't want to ignore the fact that, yeah, I'd love to have more, but it's not working out for me right now. I don't want to not acknowledge my babies. What do you do? And so I did what any exhausted, grieving mother does, and I burst into tears. Right there in the checkout line of the grocery store. bawling my eyes out. She stopped talking at that point, which I guess was helpful to me. But really, having an ugly cry in the checkout line is not the ideal way to end the day. And so I said, fine, the next time it happens, I'm just going to say I have 4 kids and that's it. And we're not going to go anywhere with that. And so again, it happens. Oh, your kids are cute. Thank you. Do you have any other kids? No. Oh, and then I felt awful because I was denying the other children I did have. They just weren't living. But I thought, you know what? Maybe we're done. Except no. Oh, well, maybe you'll have more. Thanks. Really? And, you know, these conversations, these everyday conversations, I never would have given a second thought to until I had to say goodbye to my babies. Until I've had to wrestle with, how do I talk about the fact that I have 11 children? I have carried 11 children under my heart. I have 4 of them who are living. How do I speak to this reality? You see, language, it has the power to hurt us, and it has the power to help us heal. And so for this 4th step towards healing, I encourage you to find the language that you need to use that integrates your reality into your conversations. You see, the more you speak to the reality of your experiences, the more power you remove from these conversations to hurt you. And the more they become opportunities for healing. And you know what? I did it. I sat on my bed with a mirror. I'm not joking. I was so sick of words hurting that I sat down one day and said, I am going to figure out how I'm going to talk about this until I can talk about it without crying. And I did. I looked in a mirror and I practiced. I have 4 living children. I have 7 waiting for me in heaven. I have 4 children on earth. I have 7 children in eternity. I have been pregnant 11 times. Well, I'm the mom of 11. 4 of them are with me. Whatever works for you, whatever helps you to integrate your reality into a language that you can use, that's healing. And so I encourage you to use language to help you heal, to take the power away from letting language hurt. And by using this language that you come up with for yourself, for your reality, for your experiences, for your children, to use that as you decide is appropriate in your everyday life. And so we grieve so we can remember. We surrender our control. We make peace with our bodies. We find our language. And then we ask, what can I do? And this is an important step too. And at first it might seem out of place. But you see, the first 4 steps, grieving, surrendering, making peace with our bodies, even internalizing language, they are all inward focused. They are all internal. And at some point, healing has to move from being purely internal to being external. You know, the 12 steps are fascinating. The 12 steps that are used in like the different anonymouses, because they actually include in those steps that they say are necessary to gain whatever it is you're seeking freedom from. They they include helping others, going out of yourself. And it's important, and there's wisdom there. You see, because asking what can I do and seeking to move from being inward focused to externally focused, it forces us to integrate our experiences into life. It forces us to confront what I call the new normal. And when you've lost a baby, you have a new normal that you have to learn how to exist in. And so we find ourselves in our new normal, and we get more comfortable in this new normal when we move from this inward focus to this outward focus. You know, I love this definition of being. And it says, man, a person, cannot fully find him or herself except through a sincere gift of him or herself. And I love that. I think that's so beautiful and it speaks of healing. Right? To put it in language for us on this call, a woman cannot fully find herself except through a sincere gift of herself. And my friends, when you have experienced loss, you have to find yourself again. It feels like you lose a part of yourself when you lose a baby. And so if we are to fully find ourselves again, find ourselves in this new normal, find ourselves in this thing called healing, we're not going to be fully able to do that without also somehow giving of ourselves. And that's why this fifth step is crucial. This, what can I do? But there is also a danger here, because I feel like it would be really tempting to look at this list, right? Oh, step 1, 2, 3, 4. How about I just do step 1 and then I skip to step 5. I'll grieve so I can remember, and then I'll just skip right down to helping other people. See, there's a danger in skipping steps, because healing isn't a checklist, even though I just gave you 5 things that it feels like you might be able to check off. It's a gradual process. You move through these steps. It's fluid. And when we skip these steps, right, if we fall into this trap of, well, I'm just going to skip right down to step number 5, it becomes another attempt at control. If we want to force the steps, if we want to skip them, we're really just stuck back at number 2, where we have to surrender this control. And so I encourage you to move through these steps of healing, but not to skip them, because one naturally flows out of the other. And when you find yourself grieving and then remembering, when you find yourself surrendering this control, this lie that our society says we have control, when you find yourself making peace with your body, and then finding a language that integrates your experience into the way you speak, then you will find yourself feeling compelled, feeling ready to say, what can I do? And the funny thing is, once you get there, you know what to do, because you've experienced loss. And you've experienced what it means to move through these steps towards healing. And so the what can I do question kind of answers itself. And it's going to be different for all of you. Maybe it's encountering those in your sphere of influence, in your bubble, who are going through a loss and helping them down these same steps. Maybe it's crocheting little baby hats for the pregnancy care center, for the hospital, for the NICU. Maybe it's making a meal for a sad family. Maybe it's becoming a birth and bereavement doula. Maybe it's finding how you feel called to help. Maybe it's simply being there for someone who's going through this too. Whatever it is, however you answer that question, I encourage you to ask it. And the funny thing is, you ask it as much for yourself as you do for those who you will help. And that's sort of the funny thing about giving of yourself. The more you give of yourself, sometimes it feels like the more you receive. And in this case, when you reach this final step towards healing and you start giving of yourself in order to find yourself, you receive more healing. And so, one more time, these 5 steps towards healing are grieving so that we can remember. They are surrendering our control. They are making peace with our bodies, finding our language, and then asking, what can I do? And doing it. And I can't promise you that it will be easy, but I can absolutely promise you that it will be worth it.
Laura, this is
Yes.
Leah, and I just wanted to take the time right now to just thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. For everybody who's listening on the call right now, you can tell that Laura is just a wealth of knowledge on this topic. I think that sometimes we get caught up maybe in the physical ramifications of miscarriage and stillbirth and loss of a baby, but we sometimes neglect the spiritual and psychological needs of mental health. And so, Laura, I want to just thank you so much for sharing everything you've just shared with us. I don't want to interrupt if you have more, but I wanted to point out a question that came in during the talk.
Absolutely.
If anybody has questions that they want to submit, please do so. But I wanted to read this question to you and then see if you wanted to talk about it a little bit and then maybe start taking some other questions from other callers. A question came in, an anonymous question came in that says, can you give some tips about the practical steps to take when you find out that your baby has died?
Oh, absolutely. I can definitely speak to that. And if that is the reality for anyone on this call, I just want to say I'm sorry. I know what it's like to be there, and when you find yourself there, you don't wish it on anyone. And I'm very sorry. The practical steps you take look a little different depending on how old the baby is. And so I'll briefly go through what that might look like, some practical things to do throughout different stages of gestation. And we'll just start with the really little babies first. If you're experiencing a miscarriage. Now remember, medically speaking, a doctor might tell you you're having a miscarriage and you could be 16 weeks along. For right now, let's talk about if you find out that your baby has died and your baby is 9 weeks old or less. In that case, the doctors will likely do blood tests or ultrasounds, and they will confirm that there is no heartbeat. If your baby is very, very tiny, they may not be able to find the baby at all. At that point, you have options as to how you want to deliver or how you would like to deliver your child. Many doctors, for various reasons, might prefer a D&C. A D&C is a surgical procedure. It is not without its risks in some circumstances. The benefits of that procedure outweigh the risks. You have a right to ask your doctor what the risks are versus the benefits to you and to the wishes that you have for your baby. For early miscarriages, and that's the term that I prefer to use for a miscarriage that happens sometime before 9 weeks, early miscarriage, I really recommend using a miscarriage kit. Elizabeth Ministries has these beautiful kits, and they will overnight ship them to you, so you have it on hand. And eventually we're also going to have these available in all our Guiding Star centers, so you could go to your Guiding Star center to receive one. And this kit fits in your purse, so it allows you to be ready in case your baby is going to be delivered and you are not at home. And it includes some netting so that you can have your baby's remains if you would like to bury your baby. And that way there's no risk in losing him or her should you need to use the bathroom. The kit also includes a small burial vessel and a little blanket, because it's always nice to be able to affirm the humanity of your child. And so if you're experiencing an early miscarriage, you find out that your baby has passed away and you are to deliver a very tiny baby, I encourage you to reach out for some support. There are people who can help you when the time comes, and to make sure you can take it easy for a couple days. I know that might sound kind of silly, and a lot of doctors will tell you it's going to be like having a heavy period. But the reality is it's a little different than that. And it's good to have some time to both recover physically and recover mentally. If your baby is a little older, if your baby is between, I would say, 9 weeks and even approaching 19 weeks, a lot of doctors will refer to that as a fetal demise. And I know that sounds like a very horrible name. I prefer the term either late miscarriage or even speaking as a second trimester loss is honestly the term that I prefer to use, because it's a little bit more sensitive to the reality that if your baby is older than 9 weeks, you are going to be delivering a very tiny person who looks like a baby. Early miscarriages, you might deliver the baby in a sack. The baby might not be formed all the way, and that can also be a little jarring. But as the baby gets older, if you're experiencing a loss somewhere in between those 9 and 19 weeks, the baby is a lot more developed. In a lot of cases, depending on how old, you can determine whether or not you're carrying a boy or a girl. These tend to be the most complicated losses, both medically and emotionally. And they're complicated because there isn't a universal approach. You should discuss with your medical provider if that's what they're recommending and you are definitely over 12 weeks. As with any sort of birth, whether it is the birth of a living child, whether it is the birth of a baby who has passed away, you have options. Always ask your provider what your options are. And then you can kind of plan from there. If you want to bury your baby, make that known to your doctor or midwife, because you might prefer to be induced as opposed to having a D&C. In the case of what they will refer to as a fetal demise, it is a little bit more risky to deliver at home. If you have any kind of medical history that includes excessive bleeding or hemorrhaging postpartum, retained placentas, blood clotting disorders, iron deficiency, you really want to deliver in a safe and a controlled setting. And so I would encourage you to speak with your doctor about an induction. There's a lot of controversy around Cytotec or misoprostol for full-term delivery. But in the case of delivering a child who has passed away before 20 weeks, Cytotec induction is actually considered the standard, and it is safe, as opposed to later on in pregnancy where there can be some complications because of it. If you plan to deliver your baby at home, I encourage you to obtain a kit, another kit. Again, Elizabeth Ministries has them right now. Guiding Star will be providing them in our centers. And this will help you. It's a delivery aid. You can also find them online. The delivery aid will have things in it that will make it go a little bit smoother for you, and also come with burial vessels, little blankets, even little hats sometimes. Gather these things so you have them on hand. In a second trimester loss, it tends to be a lot more like labor in the outset. And in some cases, you even go through the different stages of labor. The difference is you don't have to fully dilate, so it goes a little quicker. A wonderful, compassionate, helpful nurse told me when I was delivering Claire, who was around 18 weeks. She kind of told me, she said, look, I want to prepare you. The way this usually goes is it feels like nothing's happening. It feels like nothing's happening. You might feel like you're kind of in early labor. Nothing's happening, and then everything happens all at once. And I can say, after having experienced that several times, that was a very accurate assessment of how that goes. So make sure, again, you can take it easy, that you can be home, you have supplies on hand to help you manage the delivery, or that you make arrangements with your healthcare provider to have that kind of controlled setting, whether it's at a birth center or the L&D at the hospital, so that you're cared for physically. And then make sure there are people who will be able to support you emotionally afterwards, because you're going to need that too. If you are experiencing what they refer to as stillbirth, a loss after 20 weeks, that's going to be much more medically managed, because there are some risks there to you physically that your doctor or your midwife is going to want to manage and keep an eye on. Again, though, you have options, and it's good to discuss those options with your provider. Preparing for a stillbirth is going to feel a lot like you're preparing for birth, except you're not going to be bringing your baby home. And so if you are going to be delivering in the hospital, I really encourage you to have on hand a pillow, a stuffed animal, something that you can hold in your arms when you leave the hospital, because you're going to want to hold something. You know, I'm digressing just a little bit here, but it's just to make the point of why it's important to have something with you. And this is the case for all losses, but particularly if you're going to be leaving the hospital empty-handed. We were taught, when I was going through my training, that women who lose a child, especially if the child was older gestationally, that upon delivering their child and having to say goodbye, that mother's arms ache, like they physically ache, because they know, the body knows you're supposed to be holding a baby and there isn't a baby to hold. So I really encourage you to have something to hold on to. And to have that on hand, have it with you. Other practical things. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was gonna draw. There's two questions that have come in from Alexia Hoyt from Christchurch, which I think are really fabulous. And one of them is a direct response to something you were just talking about a little bit ago about use of mifepristone. I think you were talking about Cytotec. I don't know if you actually were talking about mifepristone or not, but it said, is there an increased risk of infertility after using mifepristone?
So mifepristone is different from Cytotec. Cytotec's generic name is misoprostol. It's MIS. That is, it's different. Mifepristone, I believe you're referring to like the abortion pill combination, which is actually a combination of the Cytotec and this other medication. That medication, the mifepristone, yes, that carries with it risks of infertility and a whole bunch of other risks that we won't list here. The Cytotec, the biggest concern with Cytotec, and generally speaking, right, Cytotec is a drug that was developed for ulcers. They just found that it also caused uterine contractions, which is why for a while it was considered a go-to for induction. However, it's also been discovered that if it is used for full-term induction, it can cause uterine rupture because the uterus contracts too much when there is a fully developed full-term baby in the uterus. They have since found that for these second trimester losses, that it is an effective cervical ripening agent that doesn't carry the same risk of rupture because of the size of the uterus and the size of the baby. There's also, of course, like I said, other options that are really important to discuss, whether it's a cervical ripening agent that's Cervidil, whether you use Pitocin, whether you try to use natural methods, or a whole lot of different ways that you can try to induce. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned the Cytotec route, because a lot of times women are very familiar with the fact that at a full-term delivery, Cytotec is dangerous. And when they hear their OBGYN suggest Cytotec for a second trimester loss induction, they kind of get really nervous, like, oh my goodness, maybe this doctor isn't taking good care of me after all, when the reality is they're actually following sort of the gold standard protocol that has proven to be safe for that particular use of Cytotec. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Laura, for clarifying that. I think that was a really good question. Actually, thank you, Alexia, for asking that, because I think sometimes it gets really confusing. And there is another question on here that I don't know, we've got about 7 minutes left, I think, before 8 o'clock. We'll try to wrap this up at an hour. But there's one other question in here which kind of related a little bit to mifepristone, in that the question is asking you, what do you think about the confusing usage of the term pregnancy loss in describing abortions?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Sorry, it may be a little loaded. I'm not sure if you want to really go too far into that, but I know that there's some confusing usage out there right now that maybe you can address a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because there is a movement right now to kind of wrap abortion into the pregnancy loss circle, if you will, and to try to basically normalize abortion as if it's another form of pregnancy loss. And the difficulty there is that in the case of miscarriage, a second trimester loss, a stillbirth, and an infant loss, those aren't things that we choose. They aren't something that we wished for. It's not an experience that we had wanted to have happen. I usually say it's like I joined this club that I never wanted to be a part of in the first place, but here I am. Now, in the case of elective abortion, right, and let's make that clarification too. Sometimes doctors will refer to miscarriage as an abortion. It's because the medical term is there. It's sad, and I always balk when I see it on paper. It asks how many abortions, and then sometimes that the doctor is simply asking how many pregnancies have you lost. So we're going to use the term elective abortion right now to differentiate between this pregnancy loss, right, this miscarriage, the second trimester loss and stillbirth, and elective abortion, choosing to have an abortion. There's a movement to not only include abortion in what we understand as pregnancy loss, but also to include doulas like me, birth and bereavement doulas, to require us, if we are to have certain certifications in some certifying agencies, I should say, want to require doulas who want to attend women who are helping families through a loss to also attend abortions. Because honestly, I think what's happening is that pregnancy loss is like the last frontier, kind of, to confront abortion. Because for so long we've been told that our babies don't have humanity until they're born. And yet those of us who have held a baby who is 10 weeks, who have seen our children on ultrasound when they are 9 weeks, who have seen their hearts beating and then not beating, we know their humanity. And so the abortion industry can't deny the humanity of our babies. And the more we use our language to talk about the humanity of our babies, it's like these chinks in their armor and their arguments are becoming invalid. And so now they have to develop a different language, right? The power of language. Here we are again. Our language, our willingness to use our language, defining and witnessing to the humanity of our babies, is forcing the abortion industry to have to come up with its own language revision to try to normalize abortion. However, reality still remains reality. An elective abortion is a choice. Losing your baby through miscarriage, through a second trimester loss, through stillbirth, is not a choice. And the two things can never be considered the same. Grief, the grief afterwards, yes, women who have had abortions grieve. It's a much more complicated grief. But the loss itself is not the same. I hope that answered that question.
Thank you, Laura. I think that was actually a really great, succinct answer in that we have about 2 minutes left here. I wanted to point out that at the very bottom of the screen, if you're on the webcast and you can see the slides that have gone along with the presentation, there is a button for ordering Laura's brochures. And you can, if you follow that, it'll go through to the Guiding Star website shop. 2 brochures that Laura authored are available for sale at our website. They're going to be there long term now, but for the next couple of days through Friday, there is a coupon code. If you have listened to this webinar, you get the coupon code, which is, it's not very hard to remember. It's webinar. So all lowercase WEBINAR, webinar, will give you 10% off on either of Laura's brochures. There's a $5 flat shipping rate no matter how many brochures you order. So if you order 25 or if you order 2,500, it'll still be $5 to ship it to you. So if you think that it would be helpful to have these brochures on hand, please go ahead and order them. One of them is specifically for miscarriage and stillbirth, and the other brochure is for unexpected prenatal diagnosis. They're both really full of amazing information and I think really practical, helpful tips to have on hand in a number of settings, in doctors' offices, in doula practices. I'm a lactation consultant. I'm keeping these around in my lactation practice because you never know. I might need them at some point with clients as well. So I encourage you to check those out. I think you addressed most of the questions here. There were a couple kind of repeat questions that I think you addressed pretty well, Laura. Did you have anything you wanted to end with?
I don't think so. I'm looking through the questions too here. There's one I want to quickly answer. Is it normal for a miscarriage to not start until several days or weeks after fetal death is confirmed? Yes. If that's something you're experiencing right now, please don't ever hesitate to call your doctor or your midwife to have them check on you. There is a risk that starts to increase. Usually it's about 2 weeks after. The thing is, your hormones have to fall to a level where your body realizes it needs to do something. So the further along you are, sometimes the longer it can take for your hormones to hit that trigger point where your body wakes up and says, oh, I have to handle this now. So early miscarriages, they can take a couple weeks. Sometimes those second trimester losses can take even longer. It's one of those other complications. You need to be checking in with your doctor. But yes, that can be completely normal. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself, and you call your provider if you experience anything like sudden pain, fevers, chills, flu-like symptoms, or unusual discharge. Sorry, that's a horrible word to end with.
And Laura, where can they find you? Where are you available as a bereavement doula online?
So my website is Philomena Birth. It's FILUMENABIRTH.com, PhilomenaBirth.com. That is me. I think it comes up if you Google Laura Ricketts bereavement, Laura Ricketts doula, that kind of stuff, if you can't remember how to spell it. But yes, that's my ministry.
Laura, we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your wealth of knowledge and your story. It's just beautifully intimate and authentic, and we can't thank you enough for sharing it with us. And so we want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. This has been recorded. We will have the recording available very soon. If you have friends that you think would really benefit from it, we'll try to get up in the next day or two. So thank you to everybody for tuning in, and join us next month for Molly Daly when she talks about natural fertility. So thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.